What happens when one of the most celebrated stars in the world walks into what should be a routine morning show appearance, only to find herself face-to-face with a host who seems hell-bent on ambush? What we witnessed on CBS Sunday Morning wasn't just uncomfortable, it was historic. A confrontation so intense, so raw, so unhinged that it left viewers and crew stunned, and security scrambling to intervene. Jennifer Lopez arrived at the CBS studios in Manhattan at exactly 6:30 a.m. Poised, radiant, and ready. Clad in a cream-colored blazer that looked like it was plucked straight off a runway, her hair impossibly perfect for such an early call time. She was every inch the professional. She was there to promote her latest project. But what she stepped into wasn't a conversation. No warm welcome, no charm, just a cold, sharp question that sliced through the studio like a blade. "Jennifer, let's talk about your recent projects. Some critics say you're past your prime. How do you respond to that?" It was the kind of question that doesn't belong at the start of any interview, let alone one with a global icon. And yet, Jennifer stayed composed. Her smile didn't falter, but the steel in her voice made it clear she wasn't here to play games. "Well, Tony, I think that's an interesting way to start our conversation," she said evenly. "I've been blessed to have a career that spans more than 30 years. I'm still here because I evolve." He was gunning for a takedown. "Let's be honest. Your last few films haven't exactly wowed audiences. Are you struggling to accept that your best days are behind you?" Then, "I think there's been some confusion about what kind of interview this was meant to be," she said, her accent sharpening as her emotions threatened to surface. "I came here to share my work, not to be disrespected." But Tony leaned back in his chair, unfazed. He smiled smugly. "I'm just asking what people want to know. That's what journalism is, right?" Jennifer's gaze hardened. "Good. Journalism involves preparation, respect, listening, not ambush tactics disguised as attack," Tony scoffed. "Don't you think you're being dramatic?" He said it with the breezy cruelty of someone who's never been held accountable for weaponizing his platform. "Your job," Jennifer said, "is to create a conversation, not a spectacle, not controversy for clicks at my expense." The crew stood frozen. It was a knife fight, and Tony seemed to think he was winning. "Let's talk about your personal life," Tony said, shifting to full-blown character assassination. "Your relationships. Some say you have a pattern of failure. What does that say about you as a person?" Silence. A silence so loud it cracked through every corner of the studio. Jennifer leaned forward. Her voice dropped to a lethal whisper. "Excuse me?" Tony pressed harder, mistaking her fury for retreat. "I'm talking about your multiple marriages, public breakups. Don't your fans deserve to know if there's something?" The camera operators stopped breathing, and Jennifer Lopez, icon, mogul, legend, sat frozen in disbelief. "I've dealt with every kind of interviewer, every kind of media personality. I've answered personal questions when they were asked with decency. What you just did? That was a personal attackment, to humiliate me. And before we continue, I need to know, is your goal to talk about my work, or is it to tear me down for entertainment?" Tony laughed. He actually laughed. Jennifer, you're taking this too personally. This is television." And with that, he set the fuse on a moment that would detonate across the internet within hours. "Are you seriously saying I'm being too emotional about being personally attacked?" she said, voice rising. "If you can't handle tough questions about your public life, maybe interviews aren't for you." Gasps. Literal gasps from the crew. One camera operator said later that Jennifer's hands were shaken not with fear, but rage. She stood up, no dramatics, just a powerful, dignified rise, a queen taking back her throne. "Stop the cameras now." Her voice hit like thunder. "It's for expecting basic human decency." She turned to the crew. "Cameras off. This interview is over." Tony scrambled. "You can't just walk out because you don't like the questions. Watch me." But Tony wasn't done embarrassing himself. "You signed a contract. You have obligations. You can't storm off just because someone asked a tough question." Jennifer spun back, eyes blazing. "A tough question? You attacked my character. You insulted my relationships, and you did it with a smirk. That's not journalism. That's cruelty." She moved toward her purse. Tony, now desperate, made one final fatal misstep. "Maybe this is why people say you're difficult to work with." Maybe this is why your relationships don't last." The studio imploded into silence. Jennifer stopped mid-step, turned. The fire in her eyes now mixed with something colder, something lethal. "What did you just say to me?" Tony stuttered, already unraveling. "I mean, maybe if you could handle criticism, you wouldn't have problems in your professional life, either." Jennifer blinked slowly, as if trying to decide whether this was really happening. "Tony, are you seriously suggesting that my response to your unprofessional behavior reflects on my character? Maybe you need to learn to take feedback." "Without getting so emotional," he said. That was the final straw. "Emotional," she repeated. Now her voice held decades of being told to smile more, to be quieter, to endure more. It held all the times she'd been asked about men instead of her music, about her relationships instead of her billion-dollar brand. It held every double standard she'd ever lived through. "Tony," she said, taking a step closer, "I want you to think very carefully about your next words." Tony missed the cue again. "Look, you're used to being treated like a princess, but this is real journalism. If you can't handle that, maybe go back to interviews where they ask about your favorite color." The condescension in his voice dripped from the ceiling. Jennifer didn't blink. "Tony, I've been interviewed by Barbara Walters, Oprah Winfrey, Anderson Cooper. You know what they had that you clearly lack? Respect, professionalism, humanity." Tony opened his mouth to respond, but Jennifer raised a hand. "I'm not finished," Jennifer said, and the authority in her voice was absolute. The studio, now suspended in total silence, waited. "You want to talk about professionalism?" she continued. "Let's talk." She stepped closer, not threatening, but with the undeniable gravity of someone who's spent her life holding rooms in the palm of her hand. A real journalist prepares. They research, they ask insightful questions that serve the audience, not their own egos. They treat their guests like human beings, not punching bags for their insecurities. Her voice dropped, laced with calm fury. "What you did today, Tony, wasn't journalism. It was a power trip, a pathetic, transparent attempt to feel relevant by trying to humiliate me." Tony flinched. Finally, something in his expression cracked in certainty, maybe even fear. But he tried, one last time, to spin control. "You know what, Jennifer? Maybe the real problem here isn't me. Maybe you've just surrounded yourself with too many yes men for too long. Maybe that's why you can't handle a little truth." The studio seemed to inhale in unison. The accusation was toxic, a subtle, veiled suggestion that Jennifer's entire career was built on delusion. She stared at him, unmoving, then spoke with ice in her veins. "Do you honestly think I've survived in this industry, thrived in it for 3 decades by being lied to? Do you think I don't know who I am, what I'm capable of?" She gestured to the crucilant, wide-eyed, some visibly distressed. "Look around. Do you see anyone who thinks what you're doing is normal, professional, humane?" Indeed, several crew members had already backed away. One had discreetly begun texting. Another was clearly recording audio insurance, perhaps, for what had already become an HR-level disaster. Tony, out of excuses and bluster, threw up one last line of defense. "I don't need approval from the crew, or from you. This is my show. I run it how I want." Jennifer's smile returned, but it was colder now, sharper. A weapon honed by decades of surviving situations just like this, but never quite this blatant. "Your show," she repeated. "Tony, let me explain something to you about how television actually works." She picked up her purse. "Yes, you're the host, but I'm the guest, and guests deserve respect. More importantly, audiences tune in for people like me, to hear what we have to say, not to witness a host try to tear them down." Tony's face was losing color. His eyes darted toward the cameras, toward the exit, anywhere but her. "You've made this show into a train wreck," she continued, "and that's not compelling television. It's a PR nightmare." "Jennifer, let's just finish this properly," he said, the panic finally evident in his voice. "Properly?" Her eyebrows arched. "Tony, you do realize everything you've said has been recorded, don't you? That this footage will be reviewed by your executives, by other celebrities and guests, by people who decide whether this show stays on the air." She took a step toward the studio door, then paused her final look at a man who had gambled and lost. And most importantly, she said, "You should know. None of what happened here reflects on me. It reflects on you. Tony scrambled, physically placing himself between her and the exit. You can't just leave. We have a contract. Legal obligations. Jennifer, cool as ever, turned slowly to face him. I honored my obligation by showing up, prepared, and professional. You violated yours when you decided this would be a character assassination. Her next words were delivered with the precise calm of a woman who's been underestimated one too many times. And if you or your team want to talk about legal matters, I suggest you look into what constitutes a hostile work environment, because what you created today might just qualify. The threat was surgical, not screamed, not shouted, just stated as fact. Tony opened his mouth, then froze. Now you're threatening me, he said, voice cracking. No, Jennifer replied. I'm educating you, something I suspect you haven't experienced in quite some time. She turned once again for the door, and that's when Tony made his final and most catastrophic mistake. Reached out and grabbed her arm. The studio went from tense to electric in half a second. Don't touch me, Jennifer said, her voice slicing through the chaos like a blade. Do not touch me. Crew members leaped into motion. The sound tech had already reached for his walkie. Camera operators stepped back, and at that very moment 2 security guards stormed into the studio. Ma'am, is everything okay? The lead guard asked, his focus locked solely on Jennifer. No, she replied. This interview is over. And this man, she pointed at Tony without even looking at him, has made it very clear that he doesn't understand boundaries. The guards nodded, stepping between her and Tony with practiced precision. Tony, she said, one final time, I want you to think very, very carefully about what you did here today, about every word, every choice, every moment you tried to diminish me. She paused at the threshold of the studio. This wasn't journalism. It wasn't entertainment. It was a warning to every future guest, every executive, every viewer about who you really are. She looked him straight in the eyes, and the difference between us is that tomorrow I move on, and you'll be explaining this for the rest of your career. With that, she turned and walked out. The studio was silent. Tony Dokoupil, still frozen, stood alone. His crew, unwilling to meet his gaze, his platform suddenly crumbling beneath him. The fallout was immediate. By that afternoon, word of the confrontation had leaked. By nightfall, industry insiders were circulating raw clips. By the next morning, CBS executives had scheduled an emergency meeting, and by noon, Tony Dokoupil was trending across every major social media platform for all the wrong reasons. Internally, CBS began reviewing the tape. Legal and PR teams were consulted. Questions swirled. Would Jennifer sue? Would the footage leak? Would sponsors pull out? Jennifer Lopez, meanwhile, continued on, with grace, with power, with the undeniable glow of someone who had not only defended herself, but had stood up for every guest who's ever been disrespected in the name of journalism. What Tony Dokoupil failed to understand was simple. Celebrity isn't weakness. Public image isn't permission. And being seated behind a desk doesn't make you the smartest person in the room. Jennifer Lopez reminded the world and Tony that true power doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from knowing who you are, refusing to be diminished, and walking away on your own terms. There are journalists who ask tough questions to inform, and there are those who ask cruel questions to feel powerful. Jennifer Lopez, and on that Sunday morning, America found out exactly which one. Tony Dokoupil was